A morning like any other, but full of dreams. Jasmine Evans stirred under her frayed floral-patterned blanket as the sharp buzz of her alarm clock shattered the stillness of the early morning. The soft gray light filtering through the thin curtains barely illuminated the tiny room she shared with her younger sister, Mia. Jasmine sighed, blinking the remnants of sleep from her eyes. Her body ached for just a few more minutes of warmth and rest, but the day had other plans. She silenced the alarm and glanced toward the wall where her vision board hung proudly. It was cluttered with dreams. Pictures of bustling college campuses, handwritten quotes about resilience, and sketches of characters from stories she hadn't yet finished. In the corner, bold letters spelled out her mantra: "Dreams are only as strong as the effort you put into them." Jasmine sat up, her fingers brushing over the cracked edges of her nightstand. Her room was modest, with mismatched furniture and peeling wallpaper, but it was filled with love and ambition. On the desk sat a worn stack of notebooks, each page brimming with her handwritten stories, fantastical adventures, heartfelt dramas, and reflections on growing up in their tight-knit community. "Mum, Jasmine," Mia's sleepy voice mumbled from the other side of the room. "Go back to sleep, sleepyhead. You've got a bit more time," Jasmine whispered with a smile. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The chill made her shiver, but it was nothing new. With practiced efficiency, she got dressed in her neatly ironed school uniform. The fabric was a bit faded, and the hem had been mended by her mother's careful hands, but Jasmine wore it with pride. It wasn't about having the newest clothes. It was about showing up ready to learn. The smell of cinnamon wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the familiar clatter of pans. Jasmine's mother was already up, cooking breakfast while humming a tune that reminded Jasmine of sunny Sunday afternoons. Their home might have been small, but it was filled with warmth and memories. As Jasmine brushed her teeth, her thoughts wandered to the scholarship opportunity her creative writing teacher had mentioned. Winning it could be life-changing, a chance to attend one of the best summer writing programs in the state. It was competitive, but Jasmine thrived on challenges. Her stories had always been her escape, her way of making sense of the world, and now they could be her ticket to something bigger. "Jasmine, breakfast's ready," her mom called. "Coming, Mom," she replied, rinsing her mouth. She hurried into the kitchen, where a plate of golden brown cinnamon toast awaited her. Mia had finally shuffled in, her hair a wild mess, and was busy digging into her plate. "Morning, sweetheart," her mom greeted with a warm smile. Despite the tired lines on her face, her mother's eyes sparkled with pride. "Morning, Mom. This smells amazing," Jasmine said, taking the seat. Her mom poured a cup of tea and sat down across from her. "Big day today, huh? Your teacher mentioned the scholarship again when I saw her at the market yesterday." Jasmine nodded, swallowing a bite of toast. "Yeah, I've been working on my submission. I just hope it's good enough." Her mom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You've always been good enough, Jas. Don't you ever forget that." After breakfast, Jasmine kissed her mom's cheek and grabbed her backpack. The weight of her books was a comforting reminder of her determination. Outside, the morning air was crisp and invigorating. Jasmine walked briskly to the bus stop, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. The street was already bustling with activity. Neighbors sweeping their porches, kids playing hopscotch on cracked sidewalks, and the scent of fresh bread wafting from the corner bakery. At the bus stop, a group of familiar faces greeted her. Layla, her best friend, waved enthusiastically. "Hey, Jas, ready to conquer the world today?" Layla teased. "You know it," Jasmine grinned. "How about you? Got your history presentation ready?" Layla groaned dramatically. "Barely. I'm just hoping Mr. Carter doesn't grill me too hard." The bus pulled up with a familiar screech, and everyone piled in. Jasmine found a seat near the middle and pulled out her notebook, eager to capture the ideas swirling in her mind. Writing on the bus had become a ritual for her, a way to steal a few precious moments of creativity before the chaos of the school day. The pages of her notebook were filled with messy but passionate scribbles. Characters danced across the lines, their stories unfolding in Jasmine's imagination. She lost herself in the world she was creating, oblivious to the hum of conversation around her. But fate had other plans for this ordinary morning. The act of kindness that changed everything. Jasmine was so immersed in her writing that she barely noticed the bus lurch to a stop. Passengers shuffled on and off, filling the aisles until the bus became a crowded maze of backpacks, handbags, and tired faces. The morning rush had begun, and the air was thick with the aroma of coffee and the faint scent of damp winter coats. The rhythmic hum of the engine served as background music to Jasmine's thoughts. Her pencil glided across the page, sketching out a scene where her protagonist faced a daunting challenge but found courage in the most unexpected place. Lost in her fictional world, she barely registered the elderly woman who boarded at the next stop. The woman, wrapped in a thick wool coat and leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane, glanced around the bus with tired eyes. Her silver hair was neatly pinned into a bun, and her face bore the gentle lines of a life well lived. The woman's gaze swept the crowded bus, searching for an empty seat. None were available. Most passengers were either glued to their phones or too engrossed in their own thoughts to notice her predicament. Jasmine's eyes flickered from her notebook to the woman, and without hesitation, she stood up. "Ma'am, you can have my seat," Jasmine offered with a warm smile. The woman's face softened, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Oh, thank you, dear. That's very kind of you." "It's no problem at all," Jasmine replied, stepping aside to let the woman sit. As the bus jolted forward, Jasmine grabbed onto a nearby pole to steady herself. Her feet ached slightly from standing, but she didn't mind. Her mother had always taught her that kindness was never wasted, and Jasmine believed it wholeheartedly. The elderly woman settled into the seat, adjusting her coat. "Young people like you give me hope," she said after a moment. Jasmine blushed slightly. "Just doing what I was raised to do," she said modestly. The woman's eyes sparkled with something unreadable. "That kind of heart will take you far, my dear. Never lose it." Jasmine nodded politely, thinking the conversation had ended. But as they continued down the bustling streets, the woman reached into her handbag and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Her fingers, adorned with rings that hinted at stories of their own, trembled slightly as she wrote something quickly. The bus slowed to a stop near a quaint park lined with bare trees. The woman rose from the seat, steadying herself with her cane. Before stepping off, she turned back to Jasmine and pressed the folded note into her hand. "Read this when you have a quiet moment," the woman said with a mysterious smile. "It's important." Jasmine blinked in surprise. Okay. Thank you." The woman nodded, her expression soft but knowing, and then disappeared into the crowd as the bus doors hissed shut behind her. Jasmine stared at the note in her hand, curiosity gnawing at her. The paper was slightly crumpled, the ink from the woman's pen still fresh. She debated opening it right then and there but decided against it. The note felt personal, almost sacred, something meant to be read with care. As the bus rumbled on, Jasmine couldn't help but wonder, who was that woman? And why did she give me this note? The rest of the ride passed in a blur. Jasmine's mind was no longer on her story, but on the unexpected encounter that had just unfolded. By the time the bus reached her stop near school, Jasmine was practically buzzing with anticipation. She clutched the note tightly in her hand as she descended the steps and made her way through the throng of students heading into the building. Her best friend Layla was waiting by the lockers, her curly hair bouncing as she waved. "Hey, Jas, you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened?" Jasmine hesitated, then showed Layla the folded note. "An old lady on the bus gave me this, said it was important." Layla's eyebrows shot up. "Mysterious much? Are you gonna open it?" "I don't know. It feels weird, like I should wait until I'm alone." Layla smirked. "What if it's a treasure map or something?" Jasmine laughed despite herself. Yeah, right. Knowing my luck, it's probably just some motivational quote. Hey, don't knock a good motivational quote, Layla teased. Anyway, you better let me know what it says when you do read it. Promise, Jasmine said, tucking the note safely into her pocket. The school day dragged on, each class blurring into the next. Jasmine found it hard to focus, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the note. What could be so important that a stranger felt compelled to pass it on to her? By the time lunch rolled around, curiosity had reached its peak. Jasmine found a quiet corner in the school courtyard, away from the chatter and chaos of the cafeteria. She pulled out the note, her heart racing. The paper unfolded easily, revealing neat handwriting in elegant cursive. Your kindness will take you places your talent alone cannot. Keep shining, Jasmine. Come to 231 River Street at 3:00 p.m. today. Trust me, this is just the beginning. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. How did the woman know her name? And what was at 231 River Street? Her pulse quickened with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Should she go? Was it safe? Her logical mind warned against it, but something deeper, a sense of destiny, perhaps, urged her to take the leap. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Jasmine folded the note and slipped it back into her pocket. One thing was certain. This day was turning out to be anything but ordinary. A leap of faith. The rest of the school day crawled by like thick syrup, each ticking second dragging Jasmine's thoughts back to the mysterious note tucked securely in her pocket. Her teacher's words faded into background noise as she replayed the encounter on the bus over and over in her mind. How did she know my name? Jasmine pondered, her pencil hovering over her open notebook during history class. Was it just a lucky guess? Maybe she overheard someone calling me. When the final bell rang, Jasmine practically bolted out of the classroom, weaving through the throng of students pouring into the hallway. Layla caught up to her near the entrance, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. You look like you're on a mission, Layla said, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. Jasmine hesitated. I'm thinking about going to that address from the note. Layla's expression shifted to concern. Wait, seriously. What if it's some kind of trap? You don't even know this lady. I know it sounds crazy, Jasmine admitted, but she didn't seem dangerous. And I don't know. I just have this feeling that I should go. Layla frowned, clearly torn between supporting her friend and worrying for her safety. Okay, but if you're going, I'm texting you every 10 minutes. And if you don't reply, I'm calling the cops. Jasmine laughed softly, touched by her friend's protectiveness. Deal. I'll text you the moment I get there. They parted ways at the school gate, and Jasmine's nerves kicked into overdrive. The address was on the other side of town, in a neighborhood she rarely visited. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. You can do this, she told herself. It's probably nothing. But what if it's everything? The bus ride to River Street was quieter than the chaotic morning commute. Jasmine sat by the window, watching the city blur past. Brick buildings, bustling markets, and clusters of people hurrying through their lives. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the note, the words etched into her mind. When the bus finally reached her stop, Jasmine stepped off, her heart thudding in her chest. River Street was lined with quaint storefronts and charming brownstones, a stark contrast to the more industrial part of town where she lived. She double-checked the address. 231 River Street. It was a modest building with ivy creeping up the brick facade. A small brass plaque by the door read, River Street Creative Arts Center. Jasmine blinked in surprise. A creative arts center? Why here? Her curiosity propelled her forward. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, the scent of aged books and fresh paint greeting her. The space was bright and inviting, with walls adorned with vibrant artwork and shelves brimming with books. A friendly-looking man behind a reception desk looked up and smiled. You must be Jasmine. Her breath caught. How do you know my name? Mrs. Carter told us to expect you, he said warmly. She's in the reading room. Follow me." Jasmine's mind raced as she followed the man down a hallway lined with framed photographs of smiling artists and writers. Who was this Mrs. Carter, really? And why had she gone to such lengths to bring Jasmine here? The reading room was cozy, filled with plush chairs and stacks of books. At the center, surrounded by a small group of teenagers, was the elderly woman from the bus. "Mrs. Carter." "Ah, there you are," Mrs. Carter said with a smile that radiated warmth. "Welcome, Jasmine." Jasmine hesitated, unsure of what to say. You knew my name." "How?" Mrs. Carter's eyes twinkled. "I have my ways. But more importantly, I've been looking for someone like you, a storyteller with a kind heart." Jasmine's brow furrowed. "Why me?" "Because I've seen you," Mrs. Carter said simply. "Always with that notebook of yours, always lost in your imagination. But today, you did something that set you apart. You showed kindness when no one else did. That tells me everything I need to know." Jasmine's heart raced. "I don't understand. What is this place?" "This," Mrs. Carter said, gesturing around the room, "is a haven for young creatives. Writers, painters, musicians. We nurture talent and help it grow. And I want you to be part of it." Jasmine's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a high school student. I don't even know if I'm good enough." Mrs. Carter held up a hand. "Talent is important, yes. But heart, that's what makes a storyteller unforgettable. And you, Jasmine, have heart." Emotion welled up in Jasmine's chest. She had spent years pouring her thoughts onto paper, dreaming of opportunities like this, but never imagining they would come true. I don't know what to say," Jasmine whispered. "Say you'll come back," Mrs. Carter said gently. "We meet twice a week. There's no cost, just your commitment and your passion." Jasmine's lips trembled as a smile broke through. "Yes, I'll be here." The group around them clapped and cheered, welcoming Jasmine into their fold. As she left the center that afternoon, Jasmine felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. The weight of doubt and uncertainty had been lifted, replaced by a spark of hope. The mysterious note had led her to something extraordinary, a community that believed in her potential, and a chance to grow into the writer she had always dreamed of becoming. And this, she knew, was just the beginning. A new world of possibilities. The next few days were a blur of excitement and nerves for Jasmine. The encounter with Mrs. Carter and the invitation to the River Street Creative Arts Center felt like something out of one of her stories, a chance discovery that could change the course of her life. She kept the experience mostly to herself, unsure of how to explain it to anyone, even Layla. How do you tell your best friend that an elderly woman on a bus saw something in you that you weren't even sure existed? But Jasmine knew one thing for certain. She had to return to the center. The second visit. That Wednesday afternoon, Jasmine stood in front of the ivy-covered building once more. Her backpack felt heavier than usual, packed with her cherished notebooks filled with stories. She hesitated for a moment, nerves gnawing at her resolve. What if they change their minds? What if they realize I don't belong here? She shook off the doubts and pushed the door open. The familiar scent of paint and old books welcomed her, calming her nerves. Mrs. Carter was waiting by the reception desk, her warm smile as reassuring as ever. "Ah, right on time," she said. "Come, let me introduce you to the group properly." Jasmine followed her into the main room, where a semicircle of young creatives had gathered. Easels displayed vibrant paintings, a boy strummed a guitar softly, and several others scribbled in notebooks much like Jasmine's own. "Everyone, this is Jasmine," Mrs. Carter announced. "She's a storyteller at heart, and I have no doubt she'll inspire all of you." Jasmine's cheeks flushed as the group greeted her warmly. A girl with bright purple braids grinned. "Welcome to the chaos. I'm Tasha, painter by day, chaos coordinator by night." The boy with the guitar gave a casual nod. "I'm Leo, resident musician and snack thief." The introductions continued, each person radiating a creative energy that filled the room with possibility. Jasmine felt herself relax, the weight of self-doubt lifting with every friendly smile. "Take your time to get settled," Mrs. Carter said. "Then join us for a creative exercise. We like to call it Story Sparks." Jasmine found a cozy spot near the window and pulled out her notebook. The pages were filled with half-finished ideas, character sketches, and fragments of dialogue. She ran her fingers over the worn cover, feeling a surge of gratitude for this chance to share her world with others. Mrs. Carter clapped her hands. "All right, everyone. I want you to think of a moment in your life when a single decision changed everything. Write, paint, or express that moment in whatever way feels right." Jasmine's mind raced. A single decision. Her thoughts immediately returned to that morning on the bus. Standing up to offer her seat had seemed so small at the time, but it had led her here, to this vibrant community of dreamers and creators. Her pencil moved across the page, capturing the essence of that moment. She described the hum of the bus, the weariness in Mrs. Carter's eyes, and the unexpected kindness that had connected their lives. Words poured out of her, raw and unfiltered. She wrote about the fear of not being good enough, the longing for a place where her stories mattered, and the joy of finding exactly that when she least expected it. Time seemed to blur as she wrote, the room fading into the background. When she finally looked up, Mrs. Carter was standing beside her, reading over her shoulder. "This," Mrs. Carter said softly, "is the heart of a true storyteller." Jasmine's throat tightened. "You really think so?" "I don't just think so. I know so," Mrs. Carter said with conviction. "You have a gift, Jasmine, and this is just the beginning of what you can do. A bond of kindness." As the session wrapped up, Mrs. Carter pulled Jasmine aside. "I'd like to show you something," she said, leading her to a small office lined with bookshelves. On the wall was a framed photograph of a younger Mrs. Carter standing with a group of teenagers, all beaming with pride. "This center was built on kindness," Mrs. Carter explained. "Years ago, someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's why I created this space, to pass that kindness forward." Jasmine's eyes welled with emotion. "Is that why you gave me the note?" Mrs. Carter nodded. "I saw something in you, Jasmine, a spark that deserves to be nurtured. And I knew that a single act of kindness could open a door for you, just as it did for me." Jasmine's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "You already haven't," Mrs. Carter said with a smile. "A new chapter begins." That evening, as Jasmine walked home, the city lights flickered like stars against the darkening sky. Her mind buzzed with ideas and dreams, all fueled by the encouragement she had received at the center. She pulled out her phone and texted Layla. "You were right. This place is amazing. I think my life just changed for the better." Layla's response was almost immediate. "Told ya. Can't wait to hear all about it tomorrow." Jasmine smiled, tucking her phone away. The world suddenly felt full of possibility, and she knew that this was just the beginning of a journey she hadn't even dreamed was possible. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, rising beyond doubt. The winter wind nipped at Jasmine's face as she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights. Her thoughts danced between fragments of stories and the faces she'd met at the River Street Creative Arts Center. The world suddenly felt different, bigger, more vibrant, filled with possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine before. She clutched her notebook tightly, feeling its comforting weight. For so long, her stories had been private whispers, confined to these pages. Now they had a chance to breathe, to grow, and maybe even touch the hearts of others. Jasmine's home came into view, its modest brick facade illuminated by the porch light. The familiar creak of the front steps greeted her as she pushed open the door. "You're late, Jasmine," her mother called from the kitchen. "Sorry, Mom. I was at a place called the River Street Creative Arts Center," Jasmine explained as she slipped off her coat. Her mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Creative Arts Center. What's that about?" Jasmine hesitated. It's kind of like a place for writers and artists to work on their craft. I got invited by this amazing woman named Mrs. Carter. Her mother's brow furrowed. Invited. By a stranger. She's not just anyone, Mom. Jasmine insisted. She saw me riding on the bus and believed I had potential. And it felt right. Like I belonged there. Her mother's expression softened, though concern lingered in her eyes. As long as you're safe. But remember, your schoolwork comes first. I promise, Jasmine said earnestly. Her mother smiled faintly. You've always had a way with words, even when you were little. Maybe this place is exactly what you need. Jasmine's chest warmed at the rare praise. Thanks, Mom. The challenge. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of creativity and growth. Jasmine attended every session at the Arts Center, pouring her heart into writing exercises and sharing her stories with the group. Each day brought new challenges. Mrs. Carter pushed Jasmine to dig deeper, to find the raw, unfiltered truth in her storytelling. Don't be afraid to show vulnerability, Mrs. Carter advised. The best stories are the ones that make readers feel something. But doubt was a persistent shadow. One afternoon, Jasmine stared at a blank page, frustration knotting her stomach. Her pencil hovered uselessly, her mind a fog of uncertainty. Writer's block, Tasha asked, plopping down beside her. More like writer's doubt, Jasmine muttered. What if I'm not good enough? What if this is all a mistake? Tasha grinned. Girl, we all have those days. But you're here for a reason. Mrs. Carter doesn't waste time on people who don't have potential. Jasmine sighed. It just feels like everyone else has it figured out, and I'm still fumbling around. Newsflash. Nobody has it all figured out, Tasha said. But you show up, and that's what matters. Jasmine nodded, absorbing her friend's words. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to keep going. A turning point. One chilly Friday afternoon, Mrs. Carter announced a special project. We're hosting a showcase in 2 weeks, she said. Each of you will present a piece you've been working on. Whether it's a story, a painting, or a song, this is your chance to share your voice with the world. Excitement buzzed through the room, but Jasmine's stomach flipped. Presenting her work in front of an audience, the thought was terrifying. That evening, she sat at her desk, staring at her notebook. Her heart raced as doubt crept back in. What if they don't like it? What if I embarrass myself? She took a deep breath and flipped through the pages filled with her stories. Each word was a piece of herself, a testament to her dreams, struggles, and resilience. I can do this, she whispered. I have to. Jasmine chose a story that was deeply personal, a tale about a girl who found courage in unexpected places. It was raw and honest, and just thinking about reading it aloud made her palms sweat. But she knew it was the right choice. The night of the showcase. The night of the showcase arrived faster than Jasmine had anticipated. The Arts Center was transformed into a cozy venue, with strings of twinkling lights casting a warm glow over the room. Rows of chairs filled with family, friends, and community members created an intimate atmosphere. Jasmine stood backstage, her heart pounding. Tasha gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. You've got this, Jas. Just be yourself. Mrs. Carter's voice carried through the room. Next up, we have a very special storyteller. Please welcome Jasmine. The applause was deafening in Jasmine's ears as she stepped onto the stage, her legs trembling. The microphone stood before her, a daunting presence. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the expectant faces in the audience. Her mother sat in the front row, pride gleaming in her eyes. Jasmine's voice wavered at first, but as she delved into her story, the words flowed with surprising ease. She spoke of fear and bravery, of finding strength in vulnerability, and of the unexpected moments that changed everything. The room was silent, captivated by her tale. When she finished, there was a heartbeat of silence before the audience erupted into applause. Jasmine's chest swelled with a mix of relief and exhilaration. Mrs. Carter beamed from the sidelines, her expression filled with pride. Jasmine's mother wiped away a tear, her smile radiant. As Jasmine stepped off the stage, Mrs. Carter met her with a warm embrace. "You did it," she said softly. "I knew you would." Jasmine's heart soared. For the first time, she truly believed in herself and the power of her voice. A new beginning. That night, as Jasmine walked home under a sky sprinkled with stars, she felt transformed. The doubts that had once weighed her down were now whispers she could silence with courage. The Arts Center had given her more than just a platform. It had given her a family, a sense of belonging, and the confidence to chase her dreams unapologetically. As she looked up at the vast, starry sky, Jasmine knew this was just the beginning of her journey. There would be more challenges, more stories to write, and more moments of doubt. But now she had the strength to rise above them. The ripple effect of kindness. The days following the showcase were a whirlwind of joy and disbelief for Jasmine. Praise from friends, teachers, and even strangers trickled in as word spread about her heartfelt story. The River Street Creative Arts Center showcase had made waves, and Jasmine found herself at the center of it. At school, Layla practically tackled her in excitement. "Girl, you're famous," she squealed, waving her phone. "Look at this." Layla pulled up a post from the Arts Center's social media account, featuring a photo of Jasmine standing at the microphone, her face lit with passion. The caption read, "Jasmine, a storyteller with heart, reminded us that courage comes in many forms. Thank you for sharing your truth." Jasmine's cheeks flushed. "I can't believe they posted that." "Believe it," Layla grinned. "You earned it. And by the way, Mrs. Thompson wants you to share your story at the school assembly next week." Jasmine's stomach flipped. "Wait, what?" "You heard me," Layla said. "Everyone needs to hear what you have to say." Jasmine's initial panic gave way to a surprising sense of resolve. Maybe she could do it. Maybe her voice was meant to be heard. A visit from Mrs. Carter. That Saturday morning, Jasmine sat by the window, scribbling notes for her upcoming assembly speech. The sound of the doorbell pulled her from her thoughts. "I'll get it," she called, hurrying to the door. To her surprise, Mrs. Carter stood on the porch, a wrapped package in her hands. "Mrs. Carter," Jasmine exclaimed, "what are you doing here?" "I thought I'd drop by with a little something for you," Mrs. Carter said, stepping inside. They settled in the cozy living room, where the scent of jasmine tea lingered in the air. Jasmine's mother joined them, her smile warm but curious. "You must be Mrs. Carter," her mother said. "Thank you for believing in my daughter." "The pleasure has been all mine," Mrs. Carter said graciously. "Jasmine has a gift that's meant to be shared." Mrs. Carter placed the package on the coffee table. "Open it," she urged. With trembling hands, Jasmine unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully bound journal with her name embossed in gold on the cover. Tears prickled Jasmine's eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's a symbol of your journey," Mrs. Carter said. "Fill it with your stories, your dreams, and your truth." Jasmine hugged the journal to her chest. "Thank you for everything." Mrs. Carter's gaze softened. "Do you know why I chose you, Jasmine?" Jasmine shook her head. "Because you reminded me of myself when I was your age," Mrs. Carter confessed. "I was once a girl with big dreams but little confidence. Someone took a chance on me, and it changed my life. I wanted to pass that kindness forward." Emotion swelled in Jasmine's chest. "I'll make you proud, I promise." "You already have," Mrs. Carter said with a smile. The assembly speech. The following week, Jasmine stood backstage in the school auditorium, the hum of voices filling the air. Her heart raced, but she clutched the journal Mrs. Carter had given her, drawing strength from its weight. When the principal introduced her, Jasmine took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The sea of faces blurred as she approached the microphone. "Hi, I'm Jasmine," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I want to tell you a story about kindness, courage, and finding your voice." She recounted the morning on the bus, the unexpected note from Mrs. Carter, and how that single act of kindness had led her to the Arts Center and the showcase. But this isn't just about me, Jasmine continued. It's about how one small decision can create a ripple effect. You never know how your kindness might change someone's life, or even your own. The auditorium was silent, hanging on her every word. When you have a dream, don't be afraid to chase it, Jasmine said, her voice strong with conviction. And when you see someone who needs a little encouragement, be that person who believes in them, because that's what changed my life. As she finished, the room erupted into applause. Jasmine's heart soared, not just from the validation, but from the realization that she had made a difference. The ripple effect. In the days that followed, students and teachers approached Jasmine, sharing their own stories of inspiration. Some talked about dreams they had buried, while others simply thanked her for being brave enough to speak her truth. Jasmine knew this was only the beginning. She continued attending sessions at the Arts Center, her stories growing bolder and more authentic. Mrs. Carter remained a guiding presence, always encouraging her to push the boundaries of her creativity. One afternoon, as Jasmine sat by the window, writing in her journal, a thought struck her. Maybe I can help others find their voices too. The idea blossomed into a dream, a storytelling workshop for young creatives, inspired by the kindness that had changed her life. With Mrs. Carter's support, Jasmine launched the workshop at the Arts Center, mentoring a new generation of storytellers. Watching them find their voices filled Jasmine with a profound sense of purpose. A legacy of kindness. Years later, as Jasmine stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, now a published author and motivational speaker, she looked out at the faces eager to hear her story. She spoke of that fateful morning on the bus, the note from Mrs. Carter, and the journey that had led her here. And that's the power of kindness, Jasmine concluded. It's a gift that keeps growing, touching lives in ways you can't even imagine. As the audience rose to their feet in applause, Jasmine's heart swelled with gratitude. Mrs. Carter's simple act of kindness had sparked a journey that transformed not just Jasmine's life, but countless others. And Jasmine knew she would spend the rest of her life paying that kindness forward. Paying it forward. The sun streamed through the large windows of the River Street Creative Arts Center, now a hub of creativity and inspiration. Jasmine stood at the front of a lively workshop filled with eager young writers. The walls were adorned with artwork, motivational quotes, and framed photos from past events. One picture stood out, a photo of Jasmine and Mrs. Carter at Jasmine's first showcase, both beaming with pride. "Okay, everyone," Jasmine said, clapping her hands to get their attention. "Let's dive into today's session. We're going to talk about writing from the heart and why your unique voice matters." A hand shot up from a girl with bright, curious eyes. "How do you know if your story is good enough?" Jasmine smiled warmly. "Great question. The truth is, a good story isn't about fancy words or perfect grammar. It's about honesty. If your story makes someone feel something, joy, sadness, inspiration, then it's good enough." The girl nodded thoughtfully, and Jasmine felt a familiar sense of fulfillment. She saw pieces of her younger self in these aspiring writers, each one carrying dreams that just needed a spark of encouragement. A visit from an old friend. As the workshop wrapped up, Jasmine collected her notes and chatted with a few parents who had come to pick up their kids. Just as she was about to leave, a familiar voice called out from the doorway. "Look at you, all grown up and making waves." Jasmine turned to see Mrs. Carter, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. Her heart swelled with joy. "Mrs. Carter." They embraced warmly. "What brings you here?" Jasmine asked, leading her mentor to a cozy corner of the room. "I couldn't stay away," Mrs. Carter said with a twinkle in her eye. "I had to see this wonderful program you've built. It's everything I dreamed it would be. And more." Jasmine's eyes shimmered with gratitude. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You changed my life." Mrs. Carter squeezed her hand, and now you're changing others' lives. That's the magic of storytelling and kindness. A new opportunity. Later that evening, Jasmine sat at her desk, reviewing submissions for an upcoming youth anthology her workshop participants were contributing to. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject: Keynote Speaker Invitation. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. She had been invited to speak at a prestigious literary conference, an opportunity that would place her alongside some of the most influential voices in the literary world. Excitement mingled with nerves. She knew this was a significant step in her journey, but it also felt daunting. The next morning, she shared the news with Mrs. Carter over coffee. "They want me to be a keynote speaker," Jasmine said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Mrs. Carter beamed. "That's incredible. You've earned this, Jasmine. But remember, just be yourself. That's what people connect with." The keynote speech. The day of the conference arrived, and Jasmine found herself standing backstage, the buzz of conversation filtering through the curtain. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her speech notes. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of Mrs. Carter's words, "Just be yourself." When her name was announced, Jasmine stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. The sight of hundreds of faces staring back at her was both exhilarating and overwhelming. "Thank you for that warm welcome," Jasmine began, her voice steady. "Today, I want to talk about the power of storytelling and the ripple effect of kindness." She shared her journey, the note on the bus, Mrs. Carter's belief in her, and how that single moment of encouragement had shaped her path. "But this isn't just my story," Jasmine said, her voice filled with conviction. "It's a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is a kind word or a small act of belief in someone else." The audience hung on her every word, moved by her authenticity. As storytellers, we have the privilege of shaping narratives and inspiring change, Jasmine concluded. But it starts with listening, believing, and lifting each other up. The standing ovation that followed was overwhelming. Jasmine's heart raced with gratitude and pride. The legacy continues. Back at the Art Center, Jasmine continued mentoring young creatives, each session filled with laughter, creativity, and growth. One afternoon, a shy boy approached her after class, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. "Miss Jasmine, will you read my story?" "Of course," Jasmine said gently, unfolding the paper. As she read the boy's heartfelt tale, tears pricked her eyes. "This is beautiful," she said. "You have a gift." The boy's face lit up with hope. "Really, really," Jasmine assured him. "Keep writing, okay?" In that moment, Jasmine saw the ripple effect of Mrs. Carter's kindness coming full circle. She had become the person who believed in others, just as Mrs. Carter had believed in her. A final reflection. Years later, Jasmine stood at the front of a packed auditorium, now a celebrated author and mentor. Mrs. Carter, now retired but ever wise, sat in the front row, her smile as radiant as ever. "This journey started with a simple note on a bus," Jasmine said, "but it was never just about me. It's about all of us, the stories we share, the kindness we give, and the belief that even the smallest act can change a life." As the audience rose to their feet in applause, Jasmine knew that the legacy of storytelling and kindness would continue to ripple through generations, and she would always be there, ready to guide the next dreamer who dared to believe.